It was nearly 2 a.m. on a cold December night. Long after the lights of Harvard Yard had dimmed and the campus had gone silent, when a faint glow slipped through the basement window of the Jefferson Mathematics Building, a place no undergraduate was supposed to be at this hour. Inside, sitting on the floor beside a pile of old research journals, was a 16-year-old black girl named Aria Bennett. Her thin hoodie wrapped tight around her shoulders, as if it were armor against the world. She wasn't enrolled, wasn't allowed in the building, and certainly wasn't supposed to have access to the Department of Theoretical Mathematics. She sat there, cross-legged, scribbling across a whiteboard she'd dragged off the wall. Her hands were trembling, not from fear but from pure mental fire as she worked through lines of equations so complex. They were usually handled only by postdocs and senior researchers. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, her socks mismatched, her backpack torn at the seams. But her eyes sharp, intense, almost burning, followed every symbol as if she were conducting an orchestra of numbers. Outside, the night was empty and still, except for the faint hum of a heating pipe deeper in the building and the distant echo of campus security making its rounds. But Aria didn't hear any of it. She had one goal tonight: to crack the conjecture she'd been studying on abandoned library books and pirated PDFs for years. A proof that mathematicians called the graveyard because it buried even the brightest minds. It was the type of problem Harvard didn't expect to be touched by anyone outside elite researchers. And certainly not someone like Aria, who lived in a shelter 3 blocks away with her little brother, who worked evening shifts wiping tables, who could only sneak into this building because she'd memorized the security guard's schedule. Yet tonight, something in her felt different, electric, as if the universe had finally aligned with her desperate need to prove, if only to herself, that she wasn't invisible. She wrote a line, paused, erased it, then wrote a new one, faster this time, the chalk squeaking under the pressure. Her breath fogged the cold air. Her heart pounded. The solution was close. She could feel it, taste it, breathe it. And then, without warning, the door at the far end of the hallway creaked open. Aria froze. Her chalk dropped from her fingers and rolled noisily across the tiles, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent building. She scrambled to gather her papers, her mind spinning with panic if she was caught. She could be banned from campus, charged with trespassing, or worse. She shoved everything into her bag, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. But before she could stand, a shadow spilled across the hallway and began moving toward her. Slow, steady footsteps. Not a security guard he always dragged his feet, but someone taller. Lighter on their steps, someone who didn't belong here at this hour either. The footsteps grew closer, the silhouette sharpened, and then the figure stepped fully into the room. Aria's heart stopped. Standing in the doorway, wearing a long wool coat and scarf, carrying a stack of files and a steaming coffee, was none other than Dr. Wesley Grant, the director of Harvard's Department of Mathematics, arguably the most brilliant mind on campus, the man whose lectures filled in minutes, the man researchers chased for mentorship, the man Aria admired in secret, watching his talks online late at night when she couldn't sleep. And here he was, eyes locked on her, a girl curled on the floor, surrounded by complex equations she had no business knowing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Dr. Grant stared at the whiteboard, his brows furrowed, his breath caught halfway through his chest. He dropped the files, papers scattering across the floor, and slowly stepped closer, his eyes scanning the equations with a kind of stunned disbelief. Aria pressed herself against the cold wall, waiting for the explosion, for anger, for security, for humiliation. But instead, Dr. Grant whispered only for words, barely audible, but enough to freeze her entirely. Who? Did this work? Aria swallowed hard, her throat dry as sand. She opened her mouth, a squeak of fear catching in her lungs. But he stepped closer and pointed at a specific line near the center. "This transformation here," he said, his voice trembling. "No one has tried this variation yet, not even my senior researchers." Turned to her. Kneeling slowly, as if approaching a wild animal he feared might bolt. "Did you write this?" Aria couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't breathe. She managed a tiny, terrified nod. Dr. Grant closed his eyes, letting out a shaky exhale as if the world had shifted under his feet. When he looked at her again, Something new flickered in his eyes. Awe, confusion, fear, and something else. Hope. "Do you know what you're working on?" he asked softly. Arya hesitated, then whispered, "A partial proof of the Albert conjecture." The Albert conjecture was considered impossible, career-ending, field-shattering, and she, the girl in torn sneakers, had taken it apart like a puzzle. He stood up abruptly, ran a hand through his hair, and muttered, "This is impossible." But Arya wasn't thinking about math anymore. She was thinking about survival. "Please don't call security," she blurted out, tears burning her eyes. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here. I just stopped," he said sharply, raising a hand. Not in anger, more like disbelief. "Who are you?" She opened her mouth to answer, but her voice failed, so she just sat there trembling, her backpack pressed to her chest. Before she could speak, Dr. Grant noticed something that made him step even closer. Her bag unzipped, the corner of a folded eviction notice sticking out. A hunger relief form. A crumpled bus pass. He softened. "You're not a student," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Then how," he whispered, almost reverently, "did you do this?" Arya finally whispered, I just love math." And then everything shifted. In that silent basement at 2 a.m., something happened. Dr. Grant couldn't have predicted something that would shake Harvard, ignite global headlines, and forever change the lives of everyone involved. But for now, all he said was, "Get your things. You're coming with me." And just before the scene faded to black, the video narration invites the viewer in. Before the story continues, tell me in the comments where are you watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story keeps you hooked. Arya followed Dr. Grant through the silent hallways of Harvard like a shadow, her torn sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor as she tried to understand what was happening, why this man, this world-renowned mathematician, was treating her with a seriousness she had never received from anyone in her life. The halls felt endless, lined with portraits of Nobel winners and legendary thinkers staring down at her as if testing whether she belonged among them. And every step made her chest tighten with fear that at any second he would turn around, change his mind, call security, or accuse her of stealing someone else's work. But instead, he pushed open the heavy door to his office, the largest in the building, walls lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with decades of research, journals and framed photos of him lecturing to packed auditoriums. The room glowed softly from the desk lamp left on earlier, illuminating the dozen chalkboards scattered around the space, each filled with equations so dense they looked like languages from other worlds. Arya stepped inside hesitantly. The air smelled faintly of old books, chalk dust, and fresh coffee. Her heartbeat was loud, so loud she wondered how Dr. Grant didn't hear it echoing off the walls. He shut the door quietly, walked past her, without looking at her, and placed the whiteboard she had been using earlier against the center table, adjusting it under the lamp. Then he turned to her. "Sit." His voice was firm but strangely gentle, as if he didn't want to scare her away. She obeyed, sitting slowly on the edge of a leather chair that was softer than anything she had ever touched. Nervously in her lap as she whispered, Are you going to call anyone?" He stared at her for a long moment, then said, "No. I'm going to ask you to show me your thought process." Those words made her freeze. No one had ever asked. No one had ever cared. He pulled a chair across from her and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his sharp eyes fixed on her with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "You've approached the Albert conjecture in a way I've never seen," he said slowly. "What made you consider that transformation?" Arya swallowed hard, terrified that she would say the wrong thing, but her love for math broke through her fear. She explained that she had studied old research scrapbooks she found in the library discard pile. Piecing together forgotten theories and combining them with patterns she noticed while doing diner receipts in her head during work shifts. She explained how her brain saw numbers as shapes and rhythms rather than symbols, like music that she could hear even when silent. As she spoke, Dr. Grant's expression shifted from disbelief to shock to a kind of reverent admiration. When she finished, her voice cracked, and she quickly looked down, afraid of what he might say. He stood abruptly, Follow me. Her breath hitched. She stood slowly, unsure whether she had impressed him or disappointed him. He walked to one of the giant chalkboards and grabbed a piece of chalk. Continue your work, he said. Right now. Show me everything. Arya stepped forward, hands trembling, and wrote on the board. At first her writing was shaky fear, weighing heavy on her shoulders, but as the symbols formed and the structure built, she fell into the rhythm again. Numbers, patterns, connections, they flowed through her fingers like electricity. She forgot he was behind her, forgot she was trespassing, forgot she wasn't supposed to be here. She wrote and wrote until she filled nearly half the board, breathing heavily. Sweat collecting at her temple, her hoodie sleeves chalk-stained. Then she stopped, realizing Dr. Grant hadn't spoken for nearly 10 minutes. She turned slowly. His face was pale. His eyes were wide. His lips parted slightly like someone witnessing a miracle they didn't believe possible. This is genius, he whispered. Raw, unpolished, but genius. Arya's knees weakened. She almost fell. No one had ever called her smart, let alone a genius. At home, she was irresponsible. At work, she was that quiet girl who stays late. At school before she dropped out, she was the kid who distracted the class with questions. Tears blurred her vision, but Dr. Grant wasn't finished. He walked closer, studying her with devastating seriousness. You said you're 16, he murmured. Where are your parents? Her voice trembled. Gone, and you live with my brother, she whispered. He's 9. Dr. Grant closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, as if absorbing the weight of her reality. Then he said something she never expected. I want to help you, not out of pity, out of responsibility to brilliance when I see it. But I need the truth. All of it. Tell me your story. So, with her hands shaking and her voice breaking, Arya told him everything. How her mother worked 3 jobs until her lungs collapsed, and she died when Arya was 12. How their father vanished months later. How she and her brother bounced through relatives who didn't want them until they ended up at a shelter. How she worked at a diner to buy school books from thrift stores. How she dropped out to care for her brother. When the shelter cut their hours, how she sneaked into Harvard buildings because math was the only place where things made sense. Dr. Grant listened silently, his jaw clenched, his shoulders tight, his eyes darkening with each detail. When she finished, she felt exposed, raw, embarrassed, and terrified she had ruined whatever fragile respect he'd briefly held for her. But instead of anger, he sat down heavily, rubbing his forehead as if trying to process the impossible mix of talent and tragedy in front of him. You should have been in my seminar 2 years ago, he whispered. You should have been competing internationally by now. You should have been published by 16. Arya looked down. It should have been a lot of things. A long, silent moment passed before he stood again, his movements sharp with decision. She jolted, shaking her head. I have to my brother, he's waiting, then we'll get him, Grant said. Both of you will stay in the faculty housing building tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'm convening the board. Harvard is not going to let a mind like yours slip into the cracks of this country. Arya felt dizzy. You don't even know me. I know your work, he said, and that tells me everything. But before the moment could settle, the doorknob rattled sharply. Arya's heart leaped into her throat security. She grabbed her backpack, panic crashing over her. But Dr. Grant held out a hand to stop her. The door swung open. A woman in a long black coat stepped inside. Her heels were sharp, her posture stiff, her expression severe. She looked from Grant to Arya to the chalkboard, and her eyes narrowed. Dr. Grant stiffened. Alina. The woman's lip curled. Wesley. What exactly is going on here? Why is there a teenager in your office at 2 in the morning? And why is she solving the conjecture we've spent 8 years funding? Arya's breath stopped entirely. She didn't know who this woman was, but Dr. Grant's reaction told her she was powerful, dangerous. This is not what you think, Dr. Grant said quickly. But Alina stepped further inside, her eyes cold and calculating, locked on Arya like a predator analyzing prey. Oh, I think it's exactly what I think, she said. And Harvard is going to have a very interesting morning. The hearing room inside Harvard's historic Mellon Hall was packed so tightly that even the marble statues along the walls seemed to lean forward, listening. Word of the scandal, Harvard's director sabotaging a black girl prodigy, had exploded overnight. Reporters filled the back rows. Professors whispered like frightened children. Students stood shoulder to shoulder, holding handmade posters with Maya's name on them like she was already a legend. Maya had barely slept. Her hands were cold, her stomach churning, but she kept her head high as she walked into the room with Dr. Evelyn Pierce, her mentor, and Marcus, who refused to leave her side. The lights above felt hotter than stage lamps. The microphones in front of her hummed. It was as if all of Harvard, all of Boston, all of America, waited for her to speak. At the long table ahead, Director Alden sat stiffly, jaw clenched, eyes focused on some invisible point in the air. He looked like a man already imagining his obituary headline. But there was something else in his face, pushed deep under the surface. When the committee chair cleared his throat, the room fell silent. Today, he began. We investigate allegations that Director Jonathan Alden tampered with student work, misused university authority, and attempted to sabotage an extraordinary candidate for the National Math and Physics Fellowship. The committee members turned toward Maya. The oldest leaned forward. Miss Brooks, do you wish to begin? Maya nodded once, then stood. Her knees wobbled, but no one could see. She opened the folder in front of her, revealing the original pages of her equation rescanned from her notebook. Time-stamped before Alden touched them. My work was altered, Maya said. But this hearing isn't just about that. It's about why. The room breathed in sharply. When I solved the zero-point convergence equation, she continued, I didn't know it had already ruined one scientist's career. I didn't know the man who dismissed that scientist was the same man who tried to silence me. Eyes ping-ponged toward Alden. She lifted another document. 20 years ago, a young Ghanaian physicist named Dr. Kwame Mensah presented a theory similar to mine. Director Aldenor, then Professor Aldenor, destroyed his reputation. He dismissed his work as mathematically naive, costing him his position and career. A murmur rippled through the crowd. And now, Maya said, voice steady, he tried to do it again. To someone who looked like the very man he erased. Alden shifted, gripping the arms of his chair. His voice cracked as he stood. This is outrageous, but a booming voice interrupted him. You ruined my life. Jonathan heads turned sharply. An elderly man with silvered hair and dark skin stood near the back. A cane shook in his hand. Tears shone in his eyes. Dr. Kwame. Gasps filled the hall. Even the reporters froze. I came because I heard what you attempted with this girl. The man said, his accent warm and aching. You destroyed my career because I was too young, too foreign, too black. I begged the university to review my work, and you locked every door. Alden's face drained of color. You told me, Dr. Mensah continued, voice trembling with old wounds, that people like me don't define physics. They participate in it quietly, under supervision. The sentence hit the room like a physical blow. Maya felt her chest tighten. The words were so familiar, they mirrored the exact condescending tone Alden had used on her weeks. Earlier, Dr. Mensah pointed a shaking hand toward Maya, but she did what I couldn't. She proved the equation. She proved you wrong. And for that, you tried to erase her as well. Alden slumped into his chair. For the first time, he looked defeated, not angry, but frightened, exposed. Small, the committee chair sighed heavily and turned toward Alden. Director Alden, do you have anything to say in your defense? Alden opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes darted around the room, seeking an ally. There were none, not one. After several silent seconds, the chair gave a firm nod. Then this committee finds you guilty of misconduct, academic sabotage, and ethical violations. Effective immediately, you are removed from your position. The decision detonated through the room. Applause. Shouts, flashes from cameras. But Maya didn't celebrate. She turned instead to Dr. Mensah, whose eyes were brimming. Sir, she whispered, stepping toward him. Your work inspired mine. You weren't wrong. You were early, The old man covered his mouth, shoulders shaking. "My child, you don't know what you've restored." Evelyn Pierce placed a hand over her heart. Marcus clapped so loudly the microphones rattled, and several professors wiped tears from their eyes. The committee chair wasn't finished. "One more matter," he said. "Miss Brookshire discovery is revolutionary. With Dr. Pierce's support, Harvard is offering full sponsorship for your publication. Research grant and the National Fellowship. You will lead the project." Maya's breath snagged. Lead, not assist. Not observe, lead. The word felt unreal, like something she had to touch to believe. But before she could respond, the room suddenly erupted again, this time, not from celebration, but from a low rumble that grew louder and louder. Students were flooding into the hall. Dozens at first, then hundreds. A chain reaction of support. They held notebooks, posters, calculators. Some wore lab coats. Some wore hoodies. Some carried protest signs that now became signs of victory. One girl lifted a banner with bold red letters. Maya Brooks, the black girl who redefined physics. Maya's heart swelled. So hard she felt dizzy. She wasn't invisible. Anymore, she wasn't a quiet genius in a forgotten hallway. She had become the spark for something bigger than herself, correction years overdue, to a system that had erased too many as the students reached her. They didn't chant her name, they chanted her equation. The one Alden tried to bury. The one Mensa had dreamed of proving. The one that now belonged to all of them. ZPC. 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 It echoed down Harvard Yard, into the night, across the lawns and historic buildings. Maya felt Dr. Mensa's hand squeeze hers, trembling with pride. "This," he whispered, "is your legacy." But Maya shook her head gently. "Ours," she whispered back. "It's ours." The cold November wind rushed through the open doors of Mellon Hall, as if the universe itself had leaned in to listen. And for the first time in her life, Maya Brooks felt the world crack open, not in fear, but in infinite possibility, because brilliance had finally been seen, because truth had finally won, because history had been rewritten, and she was the one who wrote it.